In the world of independent watchmaking, arguably no name commands as much respect as F.P Journe. One of the most prolific and innovative watchmakers of our era, Journe has managed to build not only a name for himself, but also a brand identity that has nearly unrivaled status. Today we're taking a deep dive into the full history of F.P Journe across his milestone models, significant innovations in the industry, and his lasting legacy years after the introduction of his brand in 1999. Before we get to the video, please be sure to like and subscribe to help make videos like these possible in the future. François-Paul Journe was born in Marseille, France in 1957. Journe left the traditional school system at age 14, clearly not destined for a typical academic learning environment. Slightly concerned about his trajectory, Journe's mother sent him to work with his uncle, who owned a clock restoration workshop in Paris. It was in his uncle's shop that Journe was first introduced to many of the most important horological creations from Breguet, onto de Janvier, and others. Journe's uncle was actually somewhat of a rare breed in the watch world, having the technical know-how to operate on many of the most complicated and sophisticated clocks from the classical origins of the industry. François-Paul clearly showed commanding skills in the shop because his uncle recommended he attend a technical school where he could properly study horology. In spite of stellar performance in all of his classes, Journe was expelled for bad behavior. Seemingly, the impatience and stubbornness that made him difficult to work with in a school environment was just the type of temperament that would later make him an incredible out-of-the-box thinker and unrelenting innovator later in his career. In 1976, Journe returned to his uncle for full-time employment, applying the knowledge he built from technical school to serious projects for many of the most important collectors in the world. Journe went hands-on with Daniels and Breguet and quickly fell in love with the tourbillon. Wishing to build a watch for himself rather than merely restoring old clocks for others, Journe set his sights on building his own tourbillon. Looking to build a movement manufactured by very few brands at the time, Journe sought out The Art of Breguet by George Daniels to equip himself with the technical skills to build the unique complication. This first watch took him about 5 years to complete, but metaphorically set the stage for all that was to come from the brand later. Not only did Journe complete a tourbillon, it featured twin barrels and a detent escapement, both sophisticated technical enhancements that added substantially to the complexity of the execution, but that also advanced the precision of the movement substantially. The watch also featured aesthetic enhancements, including blued hands and a beautiful dial display. To make this achievement even more impressive, Journe accomplished it while simultaneously building a complicated planetarium for an important client, and all while he was just 25 years of age. In the early 1990s, Journe decided to take the blueprint of his first watch and adapt it to suit a wristwatch format. He built a variety of prototypes and designed what would later become the Tourbillon Souverain. When Journe began receiving comments about his tourbillon in public, he realized that there was viability to forming his own eponymous brand. The first step was finding a space for a proper manufacturer. Journe found a spot in the center of Geneva that suited his goals and employed a subscription model to help finance his new venture. Pioneered by many famous watchmakers during their inception stages, the subscription model essentially had clients put down a deposit up front for the watch and would in turn receive a discount on the later full retail value of the watch. Journe would then take those funds and use them to cover his overhead costs and finance the creation of other pieces that he would charge full retail for. Leveraging this age-old methodology, Journe managed to put together the subscription Tourbillon Souverain. Deposits for the Tourbillon Souverain were due in 1998, and the first 20 pieces were delivered in 1999. Each piece was numbered 1 through 20. In a modern context, these subscription watches are some of the very most collectible and expensive Journe watches on the market. With where F.P Journe is in modern times, it's no surprise that the watches that Journe used to help finance the formation of his brand command such extreme sale prices. The historical significance of these watches is nearly unparalleled. To compound these considerations, most of the first 20 pieces remain with their original owners, who were not only early adopters of Journe philosophy, but in many cases close family friends or early investors in Journe's brand. Thus, when one actually does come up for sale, pretty much the entire world of Journe collectors flocks to bid on it. After the subscription pieces, a general production run of the Tourbillon Souverain was delivered from 1999 until 2003. Journe officially launched his brand at the 1999 Basel Fair, where he presented the Tourbillon Souverain in the AHCI booth. Excitingly, the early reception for these pieces far exceeded Journe's wildest expectations. In fact, he had to raise his retail prices multiple times, as he realized that he was grossly underpricing his timepieces. The Tourbillon was a huge success, but Journe hadn't waited for the proof of concept of the Tourbillon to begin working on the development of his next piece. In fact, as early as 1994, Journe was already working to master the concept of resonance. Taking inspiration from the works of Breguet, Ante de Gennevière, and other classical watchmaking masters, the concept of resonance essentially states that if you take two escapements and place them in incredibly close proximity, the two movements synchronize, and the chronometric imbalances of one are directly counteracted and counterbalanced by the second movement. As a result, the overall watch, featuring two time displays, achieves a superior degree of chronometric precision. It's an incredibly complicated phenomenon to explain, and that is only a fraction of the broader difficulty of actually making the watch movement. If you want a little bit more information about this watch, we've done a separate video going through the complete lineage of the Journe Résonance. In spite of the complexity of the Résonance, Journe was determined to get it right, and by 1998, he had a working prototype, the very first wristwatch to successfully exploit the concept of resonance. The model was launched in 2000, and like the Tourbillon Souverain, Journe offered 20 subscription pieces, although several pre-subscription examples were made and delivered prior to the subscription batch. Résonance was an incredible creation for F.P Journe. It helped to solidify his legacy and footing early in his brand's history. Both the Tourbillon and the Résonance serve as a case study in major transitions that occurred as Journe commercialized. When both models were presented in 1999 and 2000 respectively, they were sized 38mm and flaunted brass movements. Both of these details didn't stay for long, however. The Tourbillon grew to 40mm by 2001. Similarly, Journe movements changed to rose gold around 2003. In a modern context, brass and 38mm Journe are the pinnacle of Journe collectability. They were only made in the beginning of the production run of these two pieces, and they are also a market that is no longer catered to. If you like smaller watch diameters, you'll likely need to look back to these earlier pieces to suit your tastes. With the relative scarcity of these early examples, watches with brass movements and 38mm cases command a substantial premium. The third broad collection worth mentioning was the Octa. The Octa is the automatic winding counterpart to the Résonance and Tourbillon manual winding classics. The Octa Reserve de Marche, launched in 2001, was the brand's very first automatic winding watch, but it was designed to be the first of many. The brilliance behind the collection is the caliber 1300, referred to as the Octa. The 1300 became the springboard from which a handful of different movements with different complication configurations all joined a broader collection of practical everyday automatic watches with Journe's design ethos. When Journe presented the Octa Reserve de Marche, it was the very first wristwatch ever made to possess a 120-hour power reserve. In actuality, the watch would remain ticking for a supplemental 48 hours. But Journe was not sufficiently happy with the chronometric precision of the movement during this additional time frame, and therefore chose to advertise only 120 of the hours. This gives us the perfect look into the standards of excellence that permeate the Journe brand under his leadership. The Octa Collection quickly expanded to include a variety of additional models, including the Octa Calendrier, Octa Divine, Octa Lune, Octa Sport, and much more. In 2005, Journe released a collection that gets far less love than it should. The Chronomètre Souverain, ostensibly a simple family of watches, was presented in 2005. Few know it today, but the model line actually initially debuted exclusively in 40mm in platinum and rose gold. Journe wanted to keep this a simple offering, and therefore outfitted this piece with nothing more than the time and power reserve indication. Journe envisioned having the power reserve situated at 3 o'clock, a very unnatural location for power reserve due to the proximity to the keyless winding works of the crown. Journe therefore completely reimagined the design of the power reserve to accommodate his design aspirations. Again, this emphasizes the Journe philosophy of building mechanical solutions to suit the design considerations he wishes to implement on his watches. The second innovation packed into the watch is a twin barrel for consistent amplitude to the mainspring. By mounting two mainsprings in parallel, the pressure on the main gear is divided by 2. This can easily be missed, but it's just another step in Journe's quest to build the most accurate and dependable watch possible. On the aesthetic side, the Chronomètre Souverain movement is equally impressive, with the escapement seemingly floating on its own island separate from the two barrels. This was achieved by hiding the gear train that connects the two assemblies on the dial side of the movement. Journe has always been incredibly creative with his layout and aesthetics of his movements, and this is one of the most beautiful representations of that approach. In 2006, Journe expanded the Chronomètre Souverain collection to include 38mm options in rose gold and platinum, but by 2015 the 38mm variant was already discontinued, and Journe returned exclusively to 40mm pieces. Another outgrowth of the Chronomètre Souverain family is the ever-popular Chronomètre Bleu. Built on the same design ethos and movement technology, the Chronomètre Bleu sheds the power reserve and replaces the metallic dials of the Chronomètre Souverain with one of the most startling blue dials on the market. Initially presented in 2009 as a response to the financial crisis of 2008, the Chronomètre Bleu was priced below the Chronomètre Souverain. In spite of this, due to the complexity of the blue dial, the Chronomètre Bleu was actually significantly more costly for Journe to manufacture. The piece also quickly became one of the hardest models to get. Today, secondary market prices for the Chronomètre Bleu have skyrocketed, and is one of the brand's most in-demand models to this day. Continuing down the line of significant Journe watches, the Chronomètre Optimum is one of the coolest and least discussed models in the lineup. The Optimum was created in the early 2010s as Journe's vision for the perfect watch for himself personally. The Optimum notably incorporated 4 key innovations. First, it featured the same twin-barrel parallel layout that the Chronomètre Souverain utilized for accuracy purposes. Second, a constant force remontoir, one of Journe's favorite technical developments that he's placed in most of his popular models over the years. This piece also utilizes a unique biaxial escapement that divides the pressure of the escapement in 2, allowing the escapement to operate with almost no lubricant, and a natural deadbeat seconds on the caseback that comes as a consequence of the remontoir. This watch is advertised as Journe's most accurate mechanical timepiece. It features a handful of the elements that typically are the one defining enhancement of any given watch's accuracy. This watch has all of them packaged in one. Plus, it packs 70 hours of power reserve. For some reason, the Optimum gets a fraction of the press of the Résonance and the Tourbillon, but it's easily one of the coolest and most innovative watches that Journe has ever made. In 2014, Journe presented what would go on to be one of his most impactful watches, and also one of his most misunderstood. Journe's legacy is undoubtedly with mechanical watchmaking. It's what he's known for, and where he's made the biggest impact on the industry. And yet the élégante, Journe's quartz watch, has exploded on the secondary market. Initially offered as a ladies' option exclusively, the 35 by 40mm watch proved so popular with the men that Journe expanded the collection to include 40 by 48mm variant for men. Ostensibly a simple watch with a tortue shape, the élégante is actually perhaps the most technically impressive quartz watch on the market. Of course it is, as Journe's take on the complication. The secret behind this watch is the caliber 1210, easily one of the most impressive quartz movements ever made. After 35 minutes of inactivity, the watch goes to sleep, but remembers when it went to sleep, and continues to track elapsed time while asleep. When the watch is picked back up, the hands rapidly move to its current time. It's an incredible thing to watch, and the watch can remember the time weeks after it goes inactive. There's truly nothing like it on the market. Journe was undoubtedly proud of the movement, decorating it like a mechanical watch would be, with rose gold finishes and Côte de Genève. This movement allows the battery to last 8 to 10 years as an everyday wear watch, and nearly 20 years if the watch is rotated in and out of a collection. Outside the mechanical complexity, this watch is undoubtedly Journe. The dial is packed with Journe finishes, the handset matches the broader collections, plus this piece is one of the most legible, with the entire dial bearing lume, allowing the entirety of the display to glow. As you can tell, this wasn't an ordinary quartz watch. Moving on, 2019 saw the introduction of Journe's most complicated watch to date, the Astronomic Souverain. Initially debuted as a piece unique in July of 2019 as part of the only watch auction in tantalum with a blue dial, the Astronomic Souverain was later announced as a general production watch, albeit extremely limited in numbers by necessity. The incredible timepiece flaunts 18 functions and complications, including a tourbillon, minute repeater, side reel time, second time zone, moon phase, annual calendar, equation of time, sunrise and sunset indication, deadbeat seconds, and more. What makes this watch even more impressive is the fact that all of these functions are controlled from a single crown. These timepieces represent the milestone contributions Journe has made. That said, he has designed dozens of other pieces and unique watches, from the centigraph to the repetition souverain. Considering the Journe brand is not yet 30 years old, the sheer number of movements and models the brand has produced is startling. Journe is undoubtedly one of the most prolific makers of our time, and he's operating a relatively small production shop compared to the more prominent brands. So what's the secret behind Journe's success? If you would remove Journe's name from the dials of his watches, you'd still pick out the Journe from 6 feet away. That's actually not something that most brands can claim. There are very, very few independents that have built a design language, but Journe did so in a way that works hand in hand with historical watchmaking. Guilloche dials, blued steel hands, black polished frames, and more. When you look at a Journe dial, it looks like a reflection of Breguet and Daniels through a Journe lens. But when you design those hands in a particular way, when you lay out your guilloche dials with a particular pattern, when you shape your black polished frames with a certain motif, and write your dial text in a particular font, the result is something uniquely Journe. The impact that the brand has had inspiring dozens of other independent watchmakers to prop up their own brands, pushing the envelope of more complicated pieces, consistently innovating with more complicated movements than you'd see in mainstream context. Journe has left an indelible mark on the watch industry, and long after Journe is no longer with us, his watches will live on as some of the most significant contributions to mechanical watchmaking ever. Let us know down below which is your favorite and which F.P Journe you have in your personal collection. We'll see you next time.